He got this message to me by transcendental means, by arrangements that he made through his sister. And so I took this message very, very seriously, even though I was unable to execute it immediately. Nevertheless, this instruction acted because of its potency. And now, 25 or 30 years later, here we are, fully engaged in that service by the direct personal instruction of Śrīla Prabhupada. This is very similar to when Śrīla Prabhupada met his spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. On their first meeting, Bhaktisiddhanta instructed Śrīla Prabhupada to preach the message of Lord Chaitanya in the English language in the Western countries. And even though Śrīla Prabhupada at first couldn't imagine how this would be possible, in fact his response to Bhaktisiddhanta was, how are people in the West going to listen to anybody from India when India is in a dependent position, being the colonial subjects of England? So at first he even doubted that this was possible. Yet, after some years, Śrīla Prabhupada accepted initiation from Bhaktisiddhanta, and then later on, after Bhaktisiddhanta's disappearance, he took sannyas, left his family life, and adopted the lifestyle of a traveling preacher. And this Parivrajaka life led him to come to America, and of course, you know, the rest is history. So Śrīla Prabhupada achieved this great success because somehow or other, despite so many obstacles and delays, he followed the order of his spiritual master. The order of the spiritual master is extremely powerful and transcendental. And anyone in any condition of material life, even a fallen condition of material life, if they simply try, if they simply desire to follow the order of the spiritual master, can make all advancement. They can advance to the perfectional stage. Because this is the power of the lotus feet of the spiritual master. When we talk about the lotus feet, we mean service. That the relationship between the guru and the disciple is always in the mood of servant, master and servant. The guru is always the master, the student is always the servant. But there can also be overtones of friendship, and there should be. But the principal relationship is master and servant. Śrīla Prabhupada said things like, one should always feel a fool before one's spiritual master, because the spiritual master is always more advanced, more self-realized than the student. So even if one is very qualified, he should always feel like a fool before his spiritual master. And this is the recipe for advancement and success in spiritual life. This attitude.
You don't even have to try.
What's that?
You don't even have to try.
Can they hear you? He's saying that we don't even have to try. A person's achieving perfection in devotional service simply by the causeless mercy of the Lord is explained in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam in connection with the Brahmanas and their wives who were engaged in performing yajna, or sacrifice. When the wives of the Brahmanas were favored by Lord Kṛṣṇa and immediately attained the ecstasy of love of Godhead, their husbands said, "How wonderful it is that although these women have undertaken no reformatory performances, such as accepting the sacred thread, have not resided in the monasteries of the spiritual master, have not observed the strict principles of celibacy, have not undergone any austerities, and have not philosophized upon the observance of ritualistic ceremonies, they still have attained the favor of Kṛṣṇa, which is aspired after even by great mystics. How wonderful it is that these women have attained such perfection, while we, although Brahmanas who have performed all the reformatory activities, cannot attain to this advanced stage." you know, the story that Kṛṣṇa and Balaram were wandering with the cows in the forest of Vrindavan, and they came near to Mathura. And in that place, there was a village where there were a bunch of brahmanas of the ritualistic type engaged in sacrificial performances. Technically, they're called smarta brahmanas. Smarta means that they follow the smriti, or the original Vedic literatures. The 4 Vedas, Rik, Sama, Atharva, and Yajurveda, contain very complicated instructions for the performance of sacrifices. And a brahmana who follows these instructions, because they come from smriti, is called smarta. So the smarta brahmanas, they perform many, many rituals, very complicated mantras, and extensive sacrificial performances and like that. And their hope is to gradually raise themselves to higher and higher states of self-realization. So anyway, the cowherd boys, Kṛṣṇa and Balaram, and the cows were nearby, and Kṛṣṇa felt hungry. So he sent Balaram to ask these brahmanas if they could please send some prasadam. And the brahmanas were like, you know, don't bother us now, boy. We're in the middle of our very important sacrificial performances here. Huh? So they were like, you know, like the other day we did the homa sacrifice, fire sacrifice. They were doing activities like that, but, you know, much, much more complicated and extensive. So they were like, oh, we're too busy, you know, go away, young fella. So then they didn't recognize that this is Lord Balaram. They didn't, even though he said, you know, Kṛṣṇa and Balaram, his brother, you know, the cowherd boys tried to explain, you know, Kṛṣṇa and Balaram are asking for food, you know, but they were still like, oh, you know, we don't have time. But the wives of the brahmanas, they were more soft-hearted, and so they actually went there. They accompanied the cowherd boys and went back to where Kṛṣṇa and Balaram were staying in the woods, and they arrived with all kinds of nice eatables, and they fed the cowherd boys very sumptuously. And because of this, then Kṛṣṇa blessed them with perfection in devotional service. And they came back, and their husband could see that they had become advanced just by the mercy of the Lord. You see? And this is because of their soft-heartedness and their willingness to serve. The service attitude is very important. So when the ritualistic brahmanas saw this, they realized that they had made a mistake. That following these rituals and all it's okay, you know. It's very nice. But there's a much higher level of devotional service which is based on pure love of God, pure love of Kṛṣṇa, direct service to Kṛṣṇa. And their wives, these ladies, had found that level simply by responding to the humble pleas of the cowherd boys that please give some food to Kṛṣṇa and Balaram. So you see, the ritualistic performance of Vedic sacrifices is good, but it's not enough to raise us to a pure devotional service platform. We need direct service to Kṛṣṇa. And this is given by the spiritual master who engages the disciple in activities that result in rasa, bhava, and all these different advanced devotional states. There is a similar statement by Narada addressed to Śrīla Rūpa Gosvāmī. My dear Śrīla Rūpa Gosvāmī, you never took the trouble to reside under the care of a spiritual master, and yet you have attained such a great status of transcendental knowledge. You never took the trouble to undergo severe austerities, and still, how wonderful it is that you have been situated in the most perfect stage of love of Godhead. Shukadeva Gosvāmī, and the wives of the Brahmanas performing yajna are vivid examples of devotees who achieved the perfectional stage of devotional service simply by the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The story of Shukadeva is that he was born as the son of Vyasadeva. And Vyasadeva, of course, was the compiler of all the Vedic literatures. So Vyasadeva was, at that time that Shukadeva appeared in the womb of Vyasadeva's wife, Vyasadeva was working on this great book, Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. So he would hear in the womb, he would hear Vyasadeva reciting Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. And just by this hearing, he became completely self-realized. That he had already attained Brahman realization in a previous life. So Shukadeva was already liberated. But then when he heard Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam in the womb,